This is section 48 of Newspaper Articles by Mark Twain. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Newspaper Articles by Mark Twain, section 48, The Sacramento Daily Union, April 1866, Part 2. The Sacramento Daily Union, April 18, 1866. Honolulu, March 1866. Still at sea. I have been here a day or two now, but I do not know enough concerning the country yet to commence writing about it with confidence, so I will drift back to sea again. The Ajax, her officers. The Ajax is a 2,000-ton propeller, and one of the strongest bulk vessels afloat. All her timber work is very heavy and fastened and bolted together as if to hold for a century. She was intended for a warship, and this accounts for her extraordinary strength. She has excellent cabin accommodations for 60 passengers, without crowding, and bunks for 40 more. She has room for over 1,200 tons of freight after her coal and stores for the round trip are all in, and when a coal depot is established for her hereafter at Honolulu, so that she need carry only fuel enough for half the voyage, she can take 200 or 300 tons more. Her principal officers all served in the war. Captain Godfrey and the chief mate, Baxter, were both in our Navy, and Sanford, the chief engineer, has seen a great deal of service. He held his commission as chief engineer in the Navy for 16 years, and was in 7 battles in the Mexican War and 6 during the Rebellion, a very good record. Height, the purser, served under General Sherman in the Paymaster's Department with the rank of captain. The steamer's engines. The Ajax has a Harp engine laid horizontally, so as to be entirely below the waterline, a judicious arrangement, in view of the ship's intended duty originally, in a service where cannon balls and shells would pelt her, instead of the rain showers of the Pacific. The horizontal engine takes up much less room than when placed in an upright position. It packs as closely as sardines in a box, and gives the ship a good deal of extra space for freight and passengers. Every portion of the Ajax engine and fire rooms is kept in perfect neatness and good order by the chief's crew of 18 men. In this place I would drop a hint of caution to all romantic young people who yearn to become bold sailor boys and ship as firemen on a steamer. Such a berth has its little drawbacks, inconveniences, which not all the romance in the world can reconcile one to. The principal of these is the sultry temperature of the furnace-room, where the fireman, far below the surface of the sea and away from the fresh air and the light of day, stands in a narrow space between 2 rows of furnaces that flame and glare like the fires of hell, and shovels coal 4 hours at a stretch in an unvarying temperature of 148 degrees Fahrenheit. And yet how the people of Honolulu growl and sweat on an uncommonly warm day with the mercury at 82 degrees in the shade and somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 degrees in the sun. Steamer firemen do not live, on average, over 5 years. The importance of the Hawaiian trade. It is a matter of the utmost importance to the United States that her trade with these islands should be carefully fostered and augmented, because it pays. There can be no better reason than that. In actual revenue California is a burden to the country. She always falls behind. She always leaves a deficit at the end of the year to be made up by the nation. She never yields revenue enough to support the government establishments within her borders. In contrast with this, the Sandwich Islands, which cost the United States but little, have paid her, in customs, as high as $400,000 in gold coin in a single year. Duties paid upon sugar, etc., received in American ports and subtracted from the profits of the producer here. I will give the figures. They were compiled by the late N. Lombard Ingalls, Secretary of the San Francisco Board of Brokers, regarded as one of the best accountants and financial statisticians that ever visited these islands. The following estimate is for 1864. Coffee, 14,854 pounds, duty 5 cents per pound, $742.70. Molasses, 259,469 gallons, duty 8 cents per gallon, $23,757.52. Pulu, 664,600 pounds, at 7 cents per pound, $46,522. At 20%, $9,304.40. Salt, 308,000 pounds, at 18 cents per 100 pounds, $554.40. Sugar, 885,957 pounds, at 3 cents average duty, $265,558.71. Rice, 337,978 pounds, at 2½ cents per pound, $9,449.45. Unenumerated, at least $2,000. Being for San Francisco alone fully, $311,367.18. Mr. Ingalls then adds sugar and molasses sent to Portland, Oregon, the same year, on which $40,000 duties were paid, making over $350,000 paid in revenues to the United States for Sandwich Island products on the Pacific coast alone. Mr. Ingalls then says, "The Eastern vessels' cargoes consist mostly of oil transshipped from American whalers, and therefore duty-free. The balance of their cargoes are hides, wool, and sundries. I think it would be safe to estimate that the whole of them did not pay over $50,000 to the Custom House." You will acknowledge that a trade which pays so well, albeit with no risk and small expense to the United States, ought to be encouraged, extended, and irrevocably secured. There are two ways of doing this. Let Congress moderate the high duties somewhat. Secondly, let the islands be populated with Americans. To accomplish the latter, a steamer is indispensable. The sailing vessels can carry freight easily enough, but they are too slow and uncertain to build up the passenger trade from which immigration and permanent settlement here must naturally result. In California, people are always pressed for time. It is only a few scattering idlers and pleasure-seekers who can look serenely upon such an appalling sacrifice of precious hours as a tedious voyage of 3 weeks hither in a baffled and buffeted sailing vessel, and a return trip occupying 4 or 5 weeks. But business men and capitalists would run down here by the steamer when they knew the sea voyage could be ciphered down to days and hours before starting, and a short number of days at that. And with the influx of capital would come population, and then I could not ride over mile after mile of fertile soil, as I did yesterday, without seeing half a dozen human habitations. How our trade must be extended, if it is done at all. An important question to be considered is how a steamer is to be made to pay during the year or two that she is populating the islands, doubling their productions, and establishing a profitable trade for herself, for more than one-half of the export trade is now in the hands of the sailing vessels, secured to them by joint ownership in ships and plantations, by long contracts for transportation, and by advance money to planters, and will remain so for some time. The legitimate way to establish a steamer on a paying basis from the first is to give her a government subsidy of $50,000 or $100,000 a year for carrying the mails, and subtract it from the $500,000 a year appropriated for the China Mail Company, which is to begin business the 1st of next January. The latter company will either let a subcontract to the Ajax, or else put a small steamer of their own into the Honolulu trade. Probably the former. The China steamer will be a 5,000-ton vessel. The Ajax is 2,000 tons burden. Neither of them can enter here except in broad daylight, so narrow and crooked and shallow is the channel. The harbor is so small that it cannot accommodate more than 200 vessels comfortably, and so narrow that a large ship cannot be handled freely in it. It is not much wider than the river at Sacramento. A section of your river a mile and a half long opposite Sacramento would afford an ampler harbor than this. For half a mile a ship coming in winds about through a channel as crooked as a dog's hind leg, and marked by long lines of upright posts on either side, and in this channel there is not good room enough for 2 ships to pass abreast. The great China mail steamer can not enter this port. she will draw too much water. There is only about 22 feet on the bar. If she arrived here at dusk, she would have to lie at anchor outside the harbor all night and exchange mails by small boats in the morning. That is, in fair weather. In the stormy season, in the season of the terrible Kona, she might have to lie there for 5 or 6 days. The China mail steamer will be at sea from 35 to 40 days on a round trip. With her provisions and 60 or 70 tons of coal a day, and other expenses, if she gets off with an outlay of $1,500 a day while under way, she will do well. Honolulu is clear out of her way, both going and coming. Leaving San Francisco, she would naturally come down until a little below the 30th parallel to get the benefit of the trades, but from thence to Honolulu, 9 degrees further south, would be all lost time to her. Returning, she would leave Shanghai and bend around north till above the 40th parallel to get the west winds, and then if she had no destination but San Francisco, she could go straight across with a spanking breeze all the way, but that not being the case, she would make use of the west wind a great part of the voyage, I suppose, and then take in a lot of no longer useful canvas and come straight down south a matter of 20 degrees, land at Honolulu, and then sail north again about 17 to get to San Francisco. Thus, you see, she will come out of her course, outward bound, over 500 miles to strike Honolulu. Returning, she will come out of her course 1,200 altogether, full 1,700 miles every trip more than she would have to make if she left the islands out of her voyage. The Ajax is considered fast. The greatest day's run she made this trip, with the wind exactly right and every rag of canvas set and drawing, was about 300 miles. On several other occasions she did not make over 200. So, to follow the China ship the very liberal average speed of 275 miles a day (250 would be nearer right), she must lose over 6 days every voyage if she comes to Honolulu. She will fool away at least 1 day here each way, 8 days altogether, expense for a year $144,000. It cannot be done any cheaper by the China mail steamer. The Ajax can do it for a great deal less, and the China Company would make money by subletting the contract to her. The China steamer will certainly never perform the Sandwich Island part of her contract with the government. That portion will unquestionably be executed by some other steamer, and so why not turn it over to the Ajax, and thus secure to the country the benefits that must accrue to it from the permanent establishment of a San Francisco and Honolulu steamship line? I am not particular whether the Ajax owners continue her in this trade or not, but I would like to see some steamer line established on this route, and I only speak of the Ajax in this connection because she has already gained a good footing, and because she is owned by a company which has the confidence of the public and is financially able to carry out a project of this kind in a good and satisfactory manner, and because, further, if the China Company put a small steamer of their own in this trade, they will not be likely to do it for a year to come, and a 12-month is a good deal of time to lose. Mark Twain. The San Francisco Daily Union, April 19, 1866. Honolulu, March, 1866. Our arrival elaborated a little more. We came in sight of 2 of this group of islands, Oahu and Molokai, pronounced Oahu and Molokai, on the morning of the 18th, and soon exchanged the dark blue waters of the deep sea for the brilliant light blue of sounding. The fat, ugly birds, said to be a species of albatross, which had skimmed after us on tireless wings clear across the ocean, left us, and an occasional flying fish went skimming over the water in their stead. Oahu loomed high, rugged, useless, barren, black and dreary out of the sea, and in the distance Molokai lay like a homely sway-backed whale on the water. The Hawaiian flag. As we rounded the promontory of Diamond Head, bringing into view a grove of cocoanut trees, first ocular proof that we were in the tropics, we ran up the stars and stripes at the main Spencer gaff, and the Hawaiian flag at the fore. The latter is suggestive of the prominent political elements of the islands. It is part French, part English, part American, and is Hawaiian in general. The Union is the English cross. The remainder of the flag, horizontal stripes, looks American, but has a blue French stripe in addition to our red and white ones. The flag was gotten up by foreign legations in council with the Hawaiian government. The 8 stripes refer to the 8 islands which are inhabited, the other 4 are barren rocks incapable of supporting a population. Reflections. As we came in sight we fired a gun, and a good part of Honolulu turned out to welcome the steamer. It was Sunday morning, and about church time, and we steamed through the narrow channel to the music of 6 different church bells, which sent their mellow tones far and wide over hills and valleys, which were peopled by naked, savage, thundering barbarians only 50 years ago. 6 Christian churches within 5 miles of the ruins of a pagan temple, where human sacrifices were daily offered up to hideous idols in the last century. We were within pistol shot of one of a group of islands whose ferocious inhabitants closed in upon the doomed and helpless Captain Cook and murdered him 87 years ago, and lo, their descendants were at church. Behold what the missionaries have wrought. The crowd on the pier. By the time we had worked our slow way up to the wharf, under the guidance of McIntyre, the pilot, a mixed crowd of 400 or 500 people had assembled. Chinamen in the costume of their country, foreigners and the better class of natives, and half-whites, in carriages and dressed in Sacramento summer fashion. Other native men on foot, some in the cast-off clothing of white folks, and a few wearing a battered hat, an old ragged vest, and nothing else, at least nothing but an unnecessarily slender rag passed between the legs. Native women clad in a single garment, a bright-colored robe or wrapper as voluminous as a balloon, with full sleeves. This robe is gathered from shoulder to shoulder, before and behind, and then descends in ample folds to the feet, seldom a chemise or any other undergarment. Fits like a circus tent fits the tent pole, and no hoops. These robes were bright yellow or bright crimson, or pure black occasionally, or gleaming white, but solid colors and stunning ones were the rule. They wore little hats such as the sex wear in your cities, and some of the younger women had very pretty faces and splendid black eyes and heavy masses of long black hair, occasionally put up in a net. Some of these dark, gingerbread-colored beauties were on foot, generally on barefoot, I may add, and others were on horseback, astraddle. They never ride any other way, and they ought to know which way is best, for there are no more accomplished horsewomen in the world, it is said. The balance of the crowd consisted chiefly of little half-naked native boys and girls. All were chattering in the chatty, chopped-up Kanaka language, but what they were chattering about will always remain a mystery to me. The King. Captain Fitch said, "There's the King. That's him in the buggy. I know him far as I can see him." I had never seen a king in my life, and I naturally took out my notebook and put him down: tall, slender, dark, full-bearded, green frock coat with lapels and collar bordered with gold band an inch wide, plug hat, broad gold band around it. Royal costume looks too much like a livery. This man isn't as fleshy as I thought he was. I had just got these notes entered when Captain Fitch discovered that he had got hold of the wrong king, or, rather, that he had got hold of the king's driver, or a carriage driver of one of the nobility. The king was not present at all. It was a great disappointment to me. I heard afterward that the comfortable, easy-going King Kamehameha, pronounced Ka-me-ah-me-ah, the fifth, had been seen sitting on a barrel on the wharf the day before, fishing. But there was no consolation in that. That did not restore to me my lost king. Honolulu. The town of Honolulu, said to contain between 12,000 and 15,000 inhabitants, is spread over a dead level, has streets from 20 to 30 feet wide, solid and level as a floor, most of them straight as a line, and a few as crooked as a corkscrew. Houses 1 and 2 stories high, built of wood, straw, dobies, and dull cream-colored pebble and shell-conglomerated coral, cut into oblong square blocks and laid in cement, but no brick houses. There are great yards, more like plazas, about a large number of the dwelling-houses, and these are carpeted with bright green grass into which your foot sinks out of sight, and they are ornamented by 100 species of beautiful flowers and blossoming shrubs, and shaded by noble tamarind trees, and the pride of India with its fragrant flower, and by the umbrella tree, and I do not know how many more. I had rather smell Honolulu at sunset than the old police courtroom in San Francisco. Almost a king. I had not shaved since I left San Francisco, 10 days. As soon as I got ashore I hunted for a striped pole and shortly found one. I always had a yearning to be a king. This may never be, I suppose, but at any rate it will always be a satisfaction to me to know that if I am not a king I am the next thing to it. I have been shaved by the king's barber. Landsmen on sea legs. Walking about on shore was very uncomfortable at first. There was no spring to the solid ground, and I missed the heaving and rolling of the ship's deck. It was unpleasant to lean unconsciously to an anticipated lurch of the world and find that the world did not lurch as it should have done. And there was something else missed, something gone, something wanting. I could not tell what. A dismal vacuum of some kind or other, a sense of emptiness. But I found out what it was presently. It was the absence of the ceaseless dull hum of beating waves and whipping sails and fluttering of the propeller and creaking of the ship, sounds I had become so accustomed to that I had ceased to notice them and had become unaware of their existence until the deep Sunday stillness on shore made me vaguely conscious that a familiar spirit of some kind or other was gone from me. Walking on the solid earth with legs used to the giving of the decks under his tread made Brown sick, and he went off to bed and left me to wander alone about this odd-looking city of the tropics. New scenes and strong contrasts. The further I traveled through the town, the better I liked it. Every step revealed a new contrast, disclosed something I was unaccustomed to. In place of the grand mud-colored brown stone fronts of San Francisco, I saw neat white cottages with green window-shutters. In place of front yards like a billiard table with iron fences around them, I saw those cottages surrounded by ample yards about like Portsmouth Square as to size, thickly clad with green grass and shaded by tall trees, through whose dense foliage the sun could scarcely penetrate. In place of the customary infernal geranium, languishing in dust and general debility on tin-roofed rear additions or in bedroom windows, I saw luxurious banks and thickets of flowers, fresh as a meadow after a rain, and glowing with the richest dyes. In place of the dingy horrors of the willows and the painful sharp-pointed shrubbery of that funny caricature of nature which they call South Park, I saw huge-bodied, wide-spreading forest trees with strange names and stranger appearance, trees that cast a shadow like a thundercloud, and were able to stand alone without being tied to green poles. In place of those vile, tiresome, stupid, everlasting goldfish, wiggling around in glass globes and assuming all shades and degrees of distortion through the magnifying and diminishing qualities of their transparent prison-houses, I saw cats, tomcats, Marianne cats, long-tailed cats, bobtail cats, blind cats, one-eyed cats, wall-eyed cats, cross-eyed cats, gray cats, black cats, white cats, yellow cats, striped cats, spotted cats, tame cats, wild cats, singed cats, individual cats, groups of cats, platoons of cats, companies of cats, regiments of cats, armies of cats, multitudes of cats, millions of cats, and all of them sleek, fat, lazy, and sound asleep. In place of roughs and rowdies staring and blackguarding on the corners, I saw long-haired, saddle-colored Sandwich Island maidens sitting on the ground in the shade of the corner houses, gazing indolently at whatever or whoever happened along. Instead of that wretched cobblestone pavement nuisance, I walked on a firm foundation of coral built up from the bottom of the sea by the absurd but persevering insect of that name, with a light layer of lava and cinders overlying the coral, belched up out of fathomless hell long ago through the seared and blackened crater that stands dead and cold and harmless yonder in the distance now. Instead of cramped and crowded street-cars, I met dusky native women sweeping by, free as the wind, on fleet horses and astraddle, with gaudy riding sashes streaming like banners behind them. Instead of the combined stenches of Sacramento Street, Chinadom, and Brannan Street slaughterhouses, I breathed the balmy fragrance of jasmine, oleander, and the pride of India. Instead of the hurry and bustle and noisy confusion of San Francisco, I moved in the midst of a Suma calm as tranquil as dawn in the Garden of Eden. In place of our familiar skirting sand hills and the placid bay, I saw on the one side a framework of tall, precipitous mountains close at hand, clad in refreshing green, and cleft by deep, cool, chasm-like valleys, and in front of the grand sweep of the ocean. A brilliant transparent green near the shore, bound and bordered by a long white line of foamy spray dashing against the reef, and further out the dead blue water of the deep sea, flecked with whitecaps, and in far horizon a single lonely sail. At this moment this man Brown, who has no better manners than to read over one's shoulder, observes, "Yes, and hot. Oh, I reckon not. Only 82 in the shade. Go on, now, and put it all down, now that you've begun. Just say, and more centipedes, and cockroaches, and fleas, and lizards, and red ants, and scorpions, and spiders, and mosquitoes, and missionaries. Oh, blame my cats if I'd live here 2 months, not if I was Hi-yu-muck-a-muck and king of Wahoo, and had a harem full of hyenas." Wahine, most generally pronounced Waihine, seems to answer for wife, woman, and female of questionable character indifferently. I never can get this man Brown to understand that hyena is not the proper pronunciation. He says, "It ain't any odds. It describes some of 'em anyway." I remarked, "But, Mr. Brown, these are trifles." "Trifles be blowed! You get nipped by one of them scorpions once, and see how you like it. There was Mrs. Jones swabbing her face with a sponge. She felt something grab her cheek. She dropped the sponge, and out popped a scorpion an inch and a half long. Well, she got up and danced the Highland Fling for 2 hours and a half, and yell? Why, you could 'a' heard her from Lobau to Hula Hula, with the wind fair. And for 3 days she soaked her cheek in brandy and salt, and it swelled up as big as your 2 fists. And you want to know what made me light out of bed so sudden last night? Only a centipede. Nothing, only a centipede, with 42 legs on a side, and every foot hot enough to burn a hole through a rawhide. Don't you know one of them things grabbed Miss Boone's foot when she was riding one day? He was hid in the stirrup, and just clamped himself round her foot and sunk his fangs plumb through her shoe, and she just throwed her whole soul into one war-whoop and then hinted. And she didn't get out of bed nor set that foot on the floor again for 3 weeks. And how did Captain Godfrey always get off so easy? Why, because he always carried a bottle full of scorpions and centipedes soaked in alcohol, and whenever he got bit he bathed the place with that devilish mixture, or took a drink out of it, I don't recollect which. And how did he have to do once, when he hadn't his bottle along? He had to cut off the bite with his knife and fill up the hole with arnica, and then prop his mouth open with a boot-jack to keep from getting the lockjaw. Oh, fill me up about this lovely country. You can go on writing that slop about balmy breezes and fragrant flowers, and all that sort of truck, but you're not going to leave out them centipedes and things for want of being reminded of it, you know." I said mildly, "But, Mr. Brown, these are the mere—" "Mere your grandmother! They ain't the mere anything. What's the use of you telling me they're the mere whatever it was you was going to call it? You look at them raw splotches all over my face, all over my arms, all over my body. Mosquito bites. Don't tell me about mere things. You can't get around them mosquito bites. I took and brushed out my bar (mosquito net) good night before last, and tucked it in all around, and before morning I was eternally chawed up anyhow. And the night before I fastened her up all right, and got in bed and smoked that old strong pipe until I got strangled and smothered and couldn't get out, and then they swarmed in there and jammed their bills through my shirt and sucked me as dry as a life-preserver before I got my breath again.
And how did that deadfall work? I was 2 days making it, and sweated 2 buckets full of brine, and blame the mosquito ever went under it, and sloshing around in my sleep I ketched my foot in it and got it flattened out so that it wouldn't go into a green turtle shell 44 inches across the back. Jim Ayers grinding out 7 double verses of poetry about wow hoo, and crying about leaving the blasted place in the last 2 verses. And you slobbering here about, well, there you are. Now, what do you say? That yellow spider could straddle over a saucer just like nothing, and if I hadn't been here to set that spittoon on him, he would have been between your sheets in a minute. He was traveling straight for your bed. He had his eye on it. Just pull that web that he's been stringing after him, pretty near as hard to break as sewing silk, and look at his feet sticking out all around the spittoon. Oh, confound wow-hoo! I am glad Brown has got disgusted at that murdered spider and gone. I don't like to be interrupted when I'm writing, especially by Brown, who is one of those men who always looks at the unpleasant side of everything, and I seldom do. Mark Twain. End of section 48.